So yesterday I was doing a little bit of Christmas shopping, and I had a fairly lengthy list that Laura had given to me, and so I was kind of making my way around town trying to knock these things off my list, and I was trying to do it as quickly as I could. I didn't think I was speeding, but I was coming up 183 north, and I got into the exit lane to exit off of the highway. And there was a nice gentleman on a motorcycle that was pointing one of those radar things in my direction. And there was no other cars around me. It was just me pulling off the road. And I saw him with that thing. When you see that, you immediately step on your brake, don't you? Whether you're speeding or you're not, you just hit the brake. He put the gun kind of in his holster, and he started to start up his motorcycle, and I knew I was dead meat. You know what I'm talking about? And my heart began to beat real fast, and I was already thinking, do I have my insurance in the glove compartment? And then I was already projecting, down the road where I'd have to spend a day in defensive driving. And all of this was happening just because the guy put the gun in his holster and was beginning to start his motorcycle. Well, I kept looking in my rearview mirror, and nothing happened. He was just adjusting his bike to a different location. Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. God, you're good. But the point I'm trying to make is that I believed I was getting a ticket, and my behavior matched what I believed. The beating heart, the whole projection thing. And I want to repeat something that I talked about a little bit last week, and that is that we all behave out of what we believe. When I was just growing up, I believed with all of my heart in Santa Claus. And because I believed in Santa Claus, I would write Santa Claus a letter and asking him for all the things that I wanted for Christmas. We would put out cookies, that he would eat, after he dropped off the gifts on Christmas Eve. And one day, I still remember as a small child looking up out of my window and seeing a red blinking light, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that that was Rudolph. That was 40 plus years ago. Now I'm beginning to think a little bit differently about that whole side of the equation, and I'm wondering if I'm going to actually write Santa this year. We behave the way we believe, don't we? And all of us do. You think about all of the different ways that we behave out of what we believe. There's like lots of superstitions out there, aren't there? Some of you, even though you've put your faith in Jesus, you still kind of buy into the superstitions that are around us. If there's a ladder, you don't want to walk underneath the ladder because you think that something bad is going to happen to you. You believe a certain way, and so you behave in accordance with that. Other superstitions, a black cat or maybe Friday the 13th or whatever. Athletes have superstitions. There was a pitcher that believed that if he wore the same hat that he started his career with, that he would pitch better. And you watch him on television, and his hat is literally falling apart. It's got sweat stains everywhere. But he believes that if he wears that hat, he's going to pitch a little bit better. He behaves as he believes. You would think that that was something that Christians would be immune to, but our very own youth pastor, Mike Collins, was telling me the other day that when the St. Louis Cardinals were, playing in the World Series, that he turned on the television as he was working out on his elliptical machine. He discovered that they were behind, in the game. And when he turned on the television set, at that exact moment, there was a rally and his team went ahead, and he was convinced it was because he was watching and cheering on, even though he was thousands of miles away from the game. And he made a decision right there that he was going to stay on the elliptical machine until the end of the game in order to help his team to victory. He didn't know that the game was going to go into extra innings. And he ended up on that elliptical machine for 2 hours. They say he's going to be okay. But he behaved out of what he believed. And we all do, don't we? When you read the Bible, you'll see story after story of men and women who were behaving out of what they believed. You have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I love that story in the Bible. And they told King Nebuchadnezzar, you know what? We will not bow down. You could throw us into the fiery furnace, but we believe that our God is able to deliver us. And they acted in harmony with what they believed in their hearts. Jesus was telling the story about a prodigal son. And this son went away on a faraway journey. And this son believed in his heart of hearts that he had forfeited his place, his position as a son in the Father's house. And he said to himself, and he wrote out a speech that would indicate what he believed, that he would go to his father and say, I'm no longer worthy to be called a son. I'll just be a servant in your house. He believed in his heart, and then he behaved accordingly. But he had no idea that the God that he served, the Father that he served, was so much more generous than he ever imagined. And when he was a long way off, the Father ran to him and hugged him and kissed him and loved on him and restored him back to sonship. The older brother believed that the father was too generous. And because he believed that, he refused to come into the Father's house. You see, we all behave out of what we believe. There's a story in the Bible about a woman who had a physical condition that needed a healing, and she spent all of her money trying to get better and went to doctors and every hospital and every place where she could, and nothing really helped. But she believed that this Jesus could heal her, and because she believed, she pushed her way through the crowd and just touched the hem of his garment. And in a story that is right in tune with what we're talking about here this morning, there's a story about the rich young ruler who believed in his heart that he was better off holding on to all of his stuff, that he passed on an invitation to follow Jesus. We all behave out of what we believe. I want to tell you a story today, a story that so deeply moved me just a couple of weeks ago when I was in Uganda, Africa. I flew over to Kampala and spent a couple of days there in that city, and then I traveled to northern Uganda, which you might know if you're kind of aware of African history or Ugandan history in particular. You'll know that in the northern part of Uganda, it's been a war zone for the last 10 to 15 years. Only over the last couple of years has peace come to that part of Uganda. And we went up to Gulu, Uganda, to hear the stories and to celebrate what is happening there through Living Hope, a ministry that our church, your generosity, helps to support. This ministry is rescuing former child soldiers, women who were former child soldiers, and giving them a hope for the future. Because I was traveling with the president of this particular organization and a few others that were involved in ministry that, were coming from outside of Gulu, these ladies decided to put on a presentation for us, and they did a typical African dance, which was fun to see. And there was a couple of hundred women that had gathered there, and I was able to share with them and pass on your love and just spend a little time encouraging them. And then they chose 2 or 3 of these women to give a testimony of what God had done in their lives. And there was one testimony given from a former child soldier whose name was Betsy that moved me to tears. And I want to tell a little bit of her story with you here this morning. And Betsy grew up outside of Gulu in a small little African village. She had a mom and she had a dad and she had some brothers and sisters. When she was just a child, she was kidnapped by the LRA, an organization that was darkly and brutally exploiting children. And she was abducted by the LRA. She was kidnapped. People who have studied the situation said that she was one of 20,000 children who were kidnapped in Uganda. She was brutally raped for many days in a row. And she was taught to fight. And she had to kill for her own survival. If she didn't kill, then she would be killed. You know, when she was kidnapped, there was no Amber Alert. There was no police that were activated. There was no news flash on the radio, look for this kind of car or look for this kind of situation. Just an innocent child who was lost in the midst of a war. And this child, along with 20,000, she lost her innocence. She should have been playing with her neighbors. She should have been in school. She should have been just out enjoying God's creation. But now she was the brutal statistic of a horrible tragedy. After she was passed from soldier to soldier and her usefulness was done, she became pregnant through one of those sexual encounters, but she couldn't even tell you who the dad was. When her usefulness was over, she was discarded from this particular group and she made the journey home. But her small little village did not have the capacity to receive her back. You would think that they would be overjoyed to see one of the children returning, but as fate would have it, they were all petrified by the psychological damage that might have taken place with this young girl. She had been a murderer. She had killed even for her own survival. Maybe she would do it again. And so the village that she was a part of actually rejected her, as her mom and dad did as well. And so she was left by the side of the road, she and her daughter, to literally die. But someone came and rescued her off of the street. Someone who is involved in a ministry that we have the privilege of supporting. And they took her into this organization called Living Hope. And she was sharing her story of what God did to her once she arrived there. And she talked about how the messages that she received had renewed her heart and transformed her life. And she highlighted two thoughts that she thought were so important to God's work in her life. And she said it was almost like in every single message she heard this theme. And it was intentional. Talking with some of the leaders afterwards, they said these are the two truths that they wanted every single person who came to Living Hope to understand and to digest and to believe in their hearts. The first truth is this, that they are loved by God. That no matter what has happened in their lives, no matter what tragedies they've endured, that they are loved by God. And Betsy was giving this testimony, and she shared an illustration that really meant so much to her. She said in one of the lessons, as she was there at the center, the person who was sharing gave the illustration of some money. And they took out a dollar bill. And they said, you know what? It doesn't matter what happens to this dollar bill. This dollar bill can be all crumpled up. This dollar bill can be spat upon. This dollar bill can be stepped on and can be all filled with the dust and the mud of the journey. But when all is said and done, no matter what happens to this dollar bill, it is still worth $1. It has never lost its purchasing power. Though no matter how it was abused, no matter how it was treated, it is still valuable. It still has worth. And when she began to realize that no matter what has happened in her past, that she was valuable and she had worth, a glimmer of hope came to her shattered heart. And she realized that she was loved. The second truth that these ministry leaders tried to emphasize to all of these former child soldiers is that they have to forgive. Truth number one, that they are loved by God. Truth number two, that they have to forgive. And again, Betsy sharing in her own words the journey that she was on. Remember this one illustration that was taught to her about how someone in a tribe had gone out into the jungle and was bitten by a snake. The tendency would be to chase that snake down and try to kill that snake that just infected you with its venom. But the speaker was communicating that in the very journey that you take to destroy the snake that infected you, the exercise of that, the running after that snake is going to propel that poison through your body, and you will end up dying trying to destroy what has infected you. the only hope for anyone is to get the venom out. And the only way you can get the venom out is to forgive. And so I'm hearing this incredible story of a young lady that was kidnapped and then brutally raped and then forced to fight in a war she had no desire to be a part of. And now on the aftermath of that, she's hearing about a God who loves her and is giving her the power and the ability to forgive even in the most darkest, abusive experience that you could ever imagine. And then her testimony began to take a different turn. And the smile came to her face. And she started talking about giving. And I thought that this was kind of strange because we weren't even planning on taking an offering. There was no financial incentive to this particular testimony, but this big old smile came on her face and she began to talk about the joy of giving. And she shared about how over the years she was trained to do a job and then she was placed in a factory where she was working, and that through the resources that she earned in that factory that she was able to buy her own home. Now, I think you think home, but it was just kind of like a hut with some thatched roof, but it was a home to her. And she bought a home and she and her daughter were able to move into that home. She makes only $24 a month. But with the most joy that you could ever imagine, Betsy was communicating about how she has the joy of giving $2.40 every single month to the Lord. She counts out her $2 and her 40 cents. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, here is a woman whose life was transformed, who God touched and rescued from the streets. And here at the end of her testimony, she's talking about the joy of giving back. And I couldn't help think about it. I've been touched by it over the last 6 weeks since I've been there. And this week I was thinking, I wonder what Betsy believed that motivated her to behave in the way that she did. What did Betsy believe? And I want to share with you what I believe in all of my heart Betsy believes that makes her the generous person that she is. I believe with all of my heart that Betsy believes that she is indebted to God. She was left on the side of the road, left to die. And like the story of the Good Samaritan that Jesus taught, somebody came along and rescued this woman and poured into her world the oil and the wine and nurtured her and encouraged her back to health again. And in this center called Living Hope, Betsy discovered a God who loved her and a God who forgave her and also gave her the power to forgive those who did what they did against her. And her heart was now free. I imagine that Betsy very clearly and without any reservation believed with all of her heart that everything she had belonged to God. That without God, she wouldn't even be alive, and neither would her daughter be alive. That everything she had in life, she owed to God. Now, thankfully, every single one of us here today, those of you who can hear me live in this auditorium, those of you who are watching in our South Campus and those online, I know that every single one of us, we don't even have a story that comes close to Betsy's story. But the truth is, we are more like her than you realize. Betsy was far away from God, but God loved her so much that he sent his only begotten son. And you know, the truth is that all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But the miracle of Christmas, the beauty of Christmas is that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. The miracle of Christmas is that God came into our world to do for us what we could not do for ourselves. And we are just like Betsy in that way. We have been bought with a price, and we are not our own. You know, we face a challenge, especially those of us growing up in Texas, living in the United States of America, and we tend to think that the good that we have in our lives is good that we have earned. Betsy would tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, and it's so clear to see, that all the good in her life is good that God has brought into her world by grace. And she would say, I believe with all of my heart that I am indebted to this God who loves me. We, on the other hand, would face the temptation to believe that the good in our lives is good that we've performed our way into, and how you believe will have everything to do with how you behave. Some of you are here to say, you know what, I went to school. I took the risk. I started the company. I did what I did. And I want to tell you who gave you the brains and who gave you the health and who gave you the environment, who allowed you to be born in this country at this time with the opportunities available to you. I'd say it all goes back to the goodness of God. You see, when you have a I own it mentality, if that's what you really believe about your resources, that they belong to you, you're going to act in a certain way. But if you believe that you've been bought with a price and all that you are and all that you have belong to God, you're going to behave in a completely different manner. You own it, it's all about pride. God owns it, then all you have is about praise. You own it, then you think that all the resources I have is about building my kingdom. If God owns it, he expands your heart to include his kingdom as well. You own it, then all you got to do is take care of yourself. God owns it, and he expands your heart to consider the needs of others. What you believe has everything to do with how you behave. And if you believe that God owns it and that all the good in your world is good that God has brought into your world, then your giving is just another way of saying, God, I love you and I worship you. As rich and as real as any song that we would sing, we raise our hands and give God praise. Our giving is just another way of saying, you know what, God, I love you for all of the good that you've brought into our world. In 2 Samuel chapter 24 and verse 24, there's a story about King David. He's about ready to make an offering. He wants to give to God. And someone sees what David's doing and wanting to help him out. He says, you know what, David, I'll pay for your offering. I'll pay for the altar. I'll pay for the sacrifice. I'll take care of everything. And you know what David says in response? He says, will I give to the Lord that which costs me nothing? Will I offer up to God that which doesn't even hurt any part of who I am? Am I just going to offer up to God something that is not valuable, is not a treasure, it's not significant? No. I want to pay for my own sacrifice. I want to pay for my own offering because it's another way of me telling God how much I love him. You say, well, what's significant to God? What's valuable to God? What's precious to God? We can make an argument here today and say that $2.40 is not all that significant. It's not going to do a whole lot in the great scheme of things. You might say it's not all that precious, it's not all that valuable. But can I tell you something? In Uganda, Africa, there's a woman named Betsy who's counting out her $2.40. She makes $24 in a month, and it's special to her. It's significant to her. It's valuable to her. And I would submit to you here this morning that if it's significant to her, it's significant to God. And if it's valuable to you, it's valuable to God. And if it costs you something, it's something that God is well pleased with. I believe with all of my heart that Betsy believes that she's indebted to him, and all she has and all she is belongs to God. Well, let me tell you something else that I'm sure Betsy believes, and that is that people are helped by her giving. Because she actually said it as I was sitting there listening to the words that she spoke with tears coming down my cheeks. She was saying, you know what, I know that there are people who gave that I don't even know their name, People from other parts of the world. And you know what? She was talking about us. Thousands of miles away, there's a church called Shoreline, and a part of what you give helps to support what's going on over there. She was talking about you. Somebody gave in order for me to get the help that I needed in my life. And you know what she said? I just want to be a part of the process. I want to partner with God. I want what God has blessed me with, even though it's not all that significant in terms of the amount. I want what I earn to help propel the cause of God's kingdom, to help make a difference in the lives of others. She knew that there were people on the other side of giving that would be benefited by her generosity. She believed that with all of her heart, and it changed her behavior.